Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to the first edition of the e-urban dialogues. So generally, when we meet, is actually a good time to see each other because around the year we just work on various projects in small or larger teams. But generally, urban dialogues is a time when we can actually gather and put the pieces of the puzzle together. But in the spirit of the times, we embraced changed a lot. So this is why this edition of the e-urban dialogues is dedicated on how you deliver urban innovation inside and outside government. We have an exciting list of guests joining us. For some, it's early morning because we have Boston colleagues joining, and for some of us, is afternoon, actually Friday afternoon. So we know that you are quite getting ready for the weekend, and quite an important weekend here in Romania because we have upcoming elections. I'm Ana Maria Vrabia. I'm co-designer and director of the Urban Innovation Unit within Cluj Cultural Center. My friends call me Ama. Unfortunately, my co-designer Ovidiu Câmpan from Cluj-Napoca municipality cannot make it today, but he's with us in spirit, and let us know if you have questions for us as the conversation will start and progress. Now, the context of the Urban Dialogues is that we designed this event back in 2017 when we started this capacity building program for building the first urban innovation unit or department in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. And this was an event that grew organically to actually explain what this thing with urban innovation is. Why do you need departments or units for it? How does it look in other parts of the world? What are some methodologies that get used from design thinking to behavioral economics? And last year, it actually evolved into what we had hoped from the first edition, in an event gathering beneficiaries of our projects, collaborators from academia, civil society, the public sector, entrepreneurs. And it was plus international guests who are practitioners in the field of urban change making. And a lot of serendipity happens within these meetings. One other important thing in terms of context of the urban dialogues is that not necessarily by design, but by a lot of peer energy. We have had our colleagues from the Boston Office for New Urban Mechanics with us since the first edition. And it was actually, we are now trying to frame it, to theorize it as a peer-to-peer exchange between units, but it actually happened because of both parties' openness for partnership, and also because we knew that we are working and in a field that is constantly changing and not necessarily having a certain structure or a name. So we are very happy that even though we are now doing this talk online, at least we are keeping this tradition to have this to have our colleagues from Boston joining us. We also wanted to capture a bit what we have been doing in the sense of being outside local government in partnership with the Cluj-Napoca municipality. So we looked at some other models that are out there. So this is why we are very thrilled that we are having with us Sylvine from the 27th region organization in France. They have actually been operating a program for municipal innovation for quite some time, a bit similar in the structure in the sense that it's outside local government, but we are going to hear more about that quite soon. So before we begin, a few housekeeping information. We are going to have a dialogue for about 1.5 hours, covering 4 main subjects. One, how is our work structured, inside or outside local government? What is the agency that we have from this points of view? Some things that we can improve and some examples, and also how the pandemic changed our work and our ecosystem. These are just some main points, but we rely on you to make this talk as personalized as possible given the circumstances. So this is why we encourage you to ask our speakers questions. We are going to be using Slido, so you just need to, if you're watching this on a desktop, just put in the browser slido.com. and then enter the event number that you see on the screen. So it's 1637. Or on the phone, you can easily download the Slido app and then just enter the number of the event. We're going to constantly check the feed over there, and after the first part of the talk of about 20 minutes, where we're going to cover who we are and what we do, we're going to open up and take questions from the Slido floor. This is, I'm going to only for the first question on introducing everybody's work, I'm going to go for a full round, but for the rest, I just encourage as open dialogue as possible, given our screens. In Slido, Alexandra, my colleague, is also going to share the bio of our guests, and you can find out more about their work. But with further ado, I'm going to pass the ball to Jacqueline to tell us more about how your work is structured and what do you do.
Thanks, Alma. It's so lovely to see you and to be with you all as part of the 4th Urban Dialogues Conference. It really is such an honor and a privilege to get to share in this work with you. It's so much about collaborations and relationship, and this conference is a perfect example of that. So thank you for letting me start my Friday with a bit of collaboration. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Office of New Urban Mechanics, and I'm sure my colleague Nigel will have his own perspective on it as well, as the co-founder. So I currently serve as the chief of staff for the team, which doesn't really mean anything specific. Within our team, we have 9 staff members who each work on a portfolio of projects that they sort of self-direct and take guidance from internal departments and external stakeholders. So I have a portfolio of projects, and then I also help with some of our internal organizational sort of work and structure. But before I get into that, let me take a step back and say our team sort of organizationally sits within the mayor's office directly. So in Boston, we have what's called a strong mayoral system. So we do have a city council, but the mayor is directly elected, and most work happens through, or much work happens through the sort of executive side of the house. And so we were founded 11 years ago at this point, which feels hard to believe, under a previous administration, under Mayor Menino, whose name was, a sort of nickname in the press was the Urban Mechanic. And so we sort of took, paid homage to that, and our name became New Urban Mechanics, and Nigel will give you more of this backstory. But it was decided that we should sit right in the mayor's office so that we could have that cross-cutting visibility to see, what's this department doing? What's this agency doing? How are those things connected? How do we, as Anna said, put some of those puzzle pieces together to greater serve residents of the city of Boston, to start making some connections and seeing the overlaps? As you may experience yourselves, a lot of local government is very siloed, right? This is a transportation project. This is an environment project. This is a schools project, but we sort of had a mandate to look across all of those things. So we report directly to the mayor via the mayor's chief of staff. but we sort of have an ability to work across internal departments. And then I think this question is interesting for us because we also always work with an external partner, whether that's a university, an artist, a community group, startup, established business. It really could be anything. But part of the reason that we try to we want to sort of mirror that inside-outside approach is that we know that not all answers come from within the local government. And further, that it helps to have that shared accountability and to create things that the communities that we're working with actually want and need by working with them and by asking them what they want and need, rather than just assuming that we know from the inside. And so on any given project that we might have, we'll have one or two internal departments whose budget we're working through or whose policy framework we're working through. We're trying to enact change in their language, if that makes sense. We're trying to make it possible to allow them to take risks and to try things that get them closer to their strategic goals, but maybe wouldn't be the normal way that they would go about doing things. And then there's often 1, 2, 3 external partners. And those folks help us share the story of the project. They help inform the design of the project. They tell us whether they like what it is, right? I'm sure Nigel can share many stories about this, but one thing that local government, at least in the US, is really good at is building things that it knows how to build, but not necessarily things that people like to use or that are easy to use. And so you get to check the box and say, okay, we did the thing, but if nobody uses it because it's such an unpleasant experience, is that really successful? And so I think I'll pause there because I want to pass it on to other colleagues, but I think the balance that we try to strike is not to play the mayor's office card often, not to come in and say, hey, we're from the mayor's office, you have to do this thing. But sometimes that does happen. And sometimes even if we don't say it, we know that when we show up in a room, we are seen in a certain way because we carry that title of mayor's office. And so the most important thing for us is to work relationally and not to work through power dynamics. And so we really, really try to articulate that clearly. We try to act in that way so that our partners can see that we're not trying to come in and be consultants and fix their problems and assume that they have problems and that we have the expertise to have the answers. It's really about being in partnership and being in dialogue, which is perfect for this conference. So I'll pass it back to you, Amma.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That's an excellent point. And actually, I think a lot of how innovation labs around the world can really exchange is whether they actually understand the local context and the differences, because in Romania, it was quite important to actually understand that we have quite a strong hierarchical society that responds to authority. And this is why the first questions when we were opening up the fact that we wanted to create a cross-cutting partnership was, okay, but how are you structured? Who do you belong to? And when we were explaining that, it's actually within a larger partnership, which is the organization Cluj Cultural Center in co-management. And so a mirror structure with the municipality, it was, and it's still getting a lot of raised eyebrows. I'm curious about your experience, Sylvine. How is your work structured and how do you find these things of being in, out, and so
on? Thank you, and also thank you for the invitation and this conversation. So if the short answer is we are outside of governments, but of course it's not that simple. We've been founded 12 years ago, and we are structured as a non-profit organization, and we call ourselves a public transformation lab. And we work with, so as a non-profit, we work with our members or subscribers, which are 40 French local governments. So it's kind of a fair divide between cities, regions, and counties, which is between regions and cities in France. And in terms of cities, we work, for instance, with Strasbourg, with Grenoble, with Mulhouse. For example, Mulhouse has a right-wing mayor. Grenoble is green, and Nantes is more of left. So we try also politically to have an equal representation, and so it means that we work with people who are our member, and that gives them the opportunity to join our programs. So we structure our work in research and action programs that we design with some of the local governments that want to work with us. So it means that we never work only with one local government bilaterally, but we always have a collective approach to the programs. So it means also that in terms of governance, we are not face-to-face, but we have a fair divide of the responsibility. And we also don't respond to public procurement. We are not a consultancy, which means that when we launch a program, we have a contract of experimentation with each of the local government. So it's also a way to ensure that we have sort of a freedom of work, and that we share a framework of equal responsibility with the local government. And we run research and action program of very different sizes and budgets also. So if I can give examples, we've been running a program called La Transfo for about 4 years with 10 local governments and a big financing also from Bloomberg Philanthropies. And the objective was to build internal innovation capacity in this 10 local governments. And with each of them, we worked for 1.5 years. So it was a very engaging program. In each of these programs, there was 4 people of the team embedded in the local government. So it was a very strong program. And we have recently launched a very much smaller program of 6 months on legal design for public commons partnership with 3 local governments. So it's just to show you that we work on very different scales. And in terms of teams, we are 8 people currently. We've been 12, but the idea is really not to grow very big. But we work more with a community, meaning that we have a community of about 60 designers, sociologists, urban planners, artists, etc. And in each of our program, we involve some of them, and we also try to involve, of course, our friends and like soulmates, etc. But we also try to involve a younger professional and try to be a sort of a testing bench also for a new generation of professionals in our sector. And yeah, I think that's and maybe another difference also with Boston is that we work with administration, meaning that we don't work that much with mayors and elected representatives. The people we talk to in the administrations are mostly public agents. So when a program starts, it's very often from a conversation with a public agent that has been following our work, that is interested by our methods, and then we have a conversation with, let's say, the chief of staff or directors, and that's usually how the work starts. So we're less connected to elected representative, and we work on multiple topics from public procurement to let's say energy saving programs, etc. So we are very cross-cutting.
Great, thank you very much, Sylvine. And actually, on Slido, Alex is going to share the booklet that Sylvine mentioned with Le Transfo, just the recent work that they have done, so you can get more context. Nigel, you are actually the co-founder and co-chair of what Jacqueline described on how Monum looks today, but I know it looked very different 10 years ago. And when we spoke last year in DC at City Lab, I knew that you were a rock star, but I also, somebody referred to you as OG, which original gangster. So tell us a bit about this tag.
I own that. I own OG. We've been doing this for a while. And I think that the starting point for us was, we were really started with a very open agenda. It was unclear what we should do. Honestly, I remember having a conversation with the mayor and his mayor's chief of staff where they basically said the job of new urban mechanics is to do new urban mechanics things. So we were given a lot of flexibility from the very beginning, which was really useful. But I think even back then, I think we were already doing projects that were unusual certainly for Boston City Hall. We were partnering, with unusual, like not the usual kind of organizations. We were partnering with sort of research centers at universities and startups and social entrepreneurs and community groups and so on. And I think the thinking was that Boston is blessed to be able to have this access to a really dynamic and rich set of resources. The community serving organizations in Boston go back decades in many instances, and the universities have been there for hundreds of years, and so on. And so the question was, how do we tap the creative energy in our city to make life better in Boston? I think that essentially was the starting point. And we were given, I was going to say a broad mandate, but it was almost no mandate. It was so broad, which was good, because out of the gate, it was the question of like, what is it that we do? Honestly, we didn't struggle very long with that. We realized that was a question that would drag us down. What is innovation? All those kinds of things. I think that it made sense for us to just try a bunch of things, and see what we would be good at and how we could add value. And so that was how we worked for the first couple of years. We were just diving into things. I think what the common thread across the work that we were doing is that it should always be resident focused, right? So we tend not to focus on the projects that are about the kind of operations projects or internal business processes, in business process reengineering, those kinds of things, which in the US was what people, if you had asked government folk back in like the mid 2000s, what government innovation would be, it would probably be business process engineering, Six Sigma and that kind of methodology. But we were pretty clear that the new urban mechanics ethos, since it is based on Mayor Menino and urban mechanics, it's all about, Mayor Menino was famous for being obsessed with trying to ensure that local government is doing things that affect the lives of our residents. And so he would always have these little, challenges to us. Sometimes he would walk in, because our office has always been right next to the mayor's. And so he and the current mayor had occasion to walk back and forth through our space. And sometimes he would just stop and he said, what are you working on? And then we would say what we were doing. He would say, well, how does that help? He would always have this fictitious neighbor in his neighborhood, Mrs. McGillicuddy. I don't think there was really ever such a person, but how does what you're doing impact her life? And in a way that was frustrating, because it made it harder. Like if Mrs. McGillicuddy couldn't understand, artificial intelligence or something, or apps, iPhone apps or something, that would seem to limit us. But at the same time, we saw it as a strength, in that we really should be doing things that our residents could understand and benefit from. So it was a really useful framework to work within, to understand, how do we align what we're doing to impacting the needs of our residents. And, what we did when we were 2 people or 3 people in the early days was very different than what we could do when we were 15 people at our biggest a few years ago, again through a Bloomberg grant, versus what we do today. And I think there's definitely been an evolution of the team and even the language that we use. You know, originally we used to use pretty broadly the language of innovation, but I think we've begun to see the limits of that language in a lot of ways. You know, it's very much, that's like the public sector in this country has been dominated by the language of innovation from the private sector, you know, which is always has this connotation of disruption. And as we started to consider that, is that really what we do? You know, are we trying to disrupt something in our city? You know, what would that even mean? And so we've begun to try to take apart some of the concepts and the language and the frameworks that we use as a public sector agency. And as Jacqueline said, no, we are very firmly within the mayor's office, but we focus exclusively as much as we can on the needs of our residents by collaborating with, you know, with the community and local institutions and with our sister agencies across local government. So I think that evolution has given us a lot of opportunity for change and to look at the lessons that we could draw from different points in our evolution.
Thanks, Nigel. Related to what you said, we actually have a lot of questions coming up on Slido. So thank you very much for the ones sending questions, and also please keep them coming. We have received a couple of tricky ones, so maybe it's a good point to open up the question. We also received weird comments from some of the people watching us. They don't know if they can actually cook or change their clothes while they're seeing this show. The answer is yes, we do not see you. We are just on YouTube, so you can multitask. This is a bit to speak to the fact that we used to really like to see each other before. So I think the first question that we have is that transformation always takes time and does not deliver results from the first attempt. How does it match political expectations to deliver short term? Which I think, yeah, it's a bit how we match what cities actually do in this framework of mandates of mayors, which, yeah. Who wants to start to take this challenge?
Yeah, I was going to say, Nigel, why don't you give the opening salvo, and I'm sure I would be happy to jump in.
So it is a tricky question, but I think we realized right from the beginning that we can't hide from the politics, right? We really have to own the politics in a certain sense, right? So everything that we do, we try to make it, you know, out in the open. And again, you know, it's very much focused on the needs of our residents. However, at the same time, we're government officials, right? So we are always in this tension of trying to balance the needs and the statements and the strategy that's coming from the mayor with those of the community, right? Which sometimes puts us in opposition with one or either of these groups. And I think the way to deal with that is just to own that tension and to say and to acknowledge that we have to be in tension in order to understand that situation. And so it requires sophistication from the team to actually negotiate our way through that. And one of the ways that we do that is really by being introspective and really trying to, I don't want to say challenge each other, but interrogate the work that we're doing and the way that we're thinking about it, and sort of rethink, you know, the simplifying assumptions that we often make, because we make them all the time, certainly, right? Because I think, you know, lately I found myself saying that a new urban mechanics project is a project that gets done, but that, right, that kind of prioritizes execution over consideration in some ways. And so it's a limiting way of thinking about it. And so we're trying to investigate all those things and just to say that, you know, the mayor is saying this thing, we're not happy about the thing he's saying. The community is saying this, you know, I think like one of the things that we always encourage our teams to bring their best selves to work. And so if you are unhappy with something, let's deal with that and let's figure out, how do we represent that in the work? Like how would it be represented in the work? Maybe, you know, to some degree, sometimes we just have to own that and just sit with it and hold it and say, we're going to do this thing because it's necessary to deliver value to our residents. But we're also not very happy where this is going. And so, but it's a constant and never-ending process for us. It's one of the things that we do constantly. It's part of our culture to be a little bit neurotic about how we're dealing with these issues.
I would add to that. Oh yeah, Sylvine, please.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add a couple of thoughts from my experience. So I've been with the team for 5 years. Nigel has obviously been there since the beginning. And so his perspective goes further back. But I think the things that I've really appreciated about our team and the role that we've been able to play within the local government is to be the sort of friendly critique, or the friendly kind of space where you can, as Nigel was saying, sort of be honest and own what is real. And I think when we take a step back and look at the sense of urgency that comes with politics, and being able to parse, like, is this actually urgent? Do we need to do something this quickly? Or is it just a sense that we want to get something out and sort of show that we did it and check the box and move on to the next thing? That's not to say that we don't work quickly. And I think that there's a false assumption that local governments have no ability to move quickly. And maybe we're seeing a little bit of counterexample in the pandemic. I think a lot of local governments, at least here in the States, have tried to stand things up very quickly. But I think being willing to ask that question of, if the theory of change and if the way of working is relational, relationship building takes time. You can't deliver against some sort of metric or KPI about trust, or whether someone has had the space to process their multi-generational trauma that they've experienced with our government in a 2-month period. So it's lovely that you hired a consultant team to deliver against a milestone that's 2 months from now, but that's just not reality. That's not going to work. And so being able to create that space to have that conversation, while also not hiding your cards for 2 years and then going back to the public and saying, look, we did the thing. Don't you love it? Don't you want to see more of it? So I think for our team, we try, as I was referencing earlier, we try to allow departments to take a little bit more risk than they otherwise would be able to. So if we're working with the Office of Food Access in Boston, and maybe they wouldn't normally do direct to resident text SMS-based messaging, but we want to try that out. Our team can come in and say, okay, we can work with this local researcher who's built this chatbot. Maybe we can next week start to prototype what it would look like to text residents directly, even though that's not usually the way we operate. And so I'm sort of contradicting myself, but I think my point is to critique like where the urgency is coming from and why the sense of urgency, but then also be willing to get something out in front of people so that they can have a reaction, they can have an experience, and not hide the work that you're doing, to Nigel's point, until there's a big, ribbon cutting grand finale. Look, we delivered against the strategy, because at that point, people have forgotten what the strategy is. It's not relevant to them anymore. So just some thoughts.
I can only agree on everything was said. Maybe just to build on it, I can share some of the experience we have in La Transfo. The way the program works is that we work with one local government for 1 year and a half, and we co-design with a group of 20 public agents what their future public innovation lab will look like, where it will be in the organizational chart, what will be its mission, what will be its teams, what will be its project, etc. And so to do this, we work on practical cases. So for example, for 4 months, we will work on one specific case with a waste management department, for example, and try to find ways to a problem. And so to this, we work like 2 or 3 days per month with this group of 20 people. So it's really a program thought in terms of acupuncture. It takes time, it takes energy. It's a diverse group of people who are not specifically trained for innovation, if there's any training, etc. So it's really relied on cultural change. And usually the recommendation we make is that you need to start under the radar, because you cannot expose a lab that is not designed yet, was not professional, but also it's also how you build a culture of experimentation, meaning that there's a right to fail if you do again, that also the management needs also to be more flexible and be more open to a diversity of ideas, etc. So I think there's maybe behind your questions, there's really this idea of how do you build a culture of experimentation within the local government, for the managers, and also for the elected representative. I think it's important also in the long term. And maybe another idea that we try to implement is also to value a diversity of impact, meaning that in a project, probably it has value if it involves a greater diversity of public agents, if it allows to bring new stories in the way the public policies are made. We also value the learnings, and we try also to share a culture of working openly and producing commons in the way that the lab work. And I think it's especially important in organizations that are used to work in silos. It's how you build cooperation, etc. So I think if the projects are also a proof of concept in these terms, it's also our responsibility to value this aspect and not only the solution that is delivered in the end.
Could I ask a follow-up to Sylvain really quickly?
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in this point about sort of how you do the work and the space in which the work happens. I think place is so important to what makes cities special, and why we all do the work that we do. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about, like, physically, what does it look like when you're doing that work with those local governments? Like, what is the space set up? What is your office like? Because I think one thing we've experienced is the visual cues and the physical change when you walk into our office or our space or a park where we're doing a thing. And I think I've experienced this in Cluj as well. It really changes the container of the conversation. So I'm just curious what that looks like for you all.
That's an interesting question. So in La Transfo, so it's a team. In La Transfo, we send a team of usually 2 designers and 1 sociologist or artist or whatever. And then there's 1 public agent from the local government that is embedded in this team. And 2 to 3 days per month, they work together with this group of 20 public agents that are from a diverse profile in the organization, meaning some are managers, some are cleaners, some are project managers, etc. And so it's also, I think, in terms of settings, for them, it's also an experience of working as a peer on new methods, going on the field, experiencing other ways of working. So that's an important setting. And then in some local government, at the beginning, we have a dedicated room, but we try also to in each session, so each month, maybe to change the setting. So for example, in Lille, we worked in a vacant space that is owned by the municipality, but that was abandoned. So there was 3 sessions that were done there. So the idea is also to both to test where the lab should be in the end. So finally in Lille, it is at the ground floor, right near the entrance, in a big shiny new building. So it's totally different. So maybe they draw lessons from it. But I think it's also a key to test. Also, some sessions were also totally done in a park because we were investigating for some. So I think it's also key to have this various settings. But I think the most important is really the human diversity and learning to work as a human group. That is key. And I think the main product of this program is also a group of people that learn to work differently and that learn to work together.
in a lot of what we're talking about, I think show, don't tell is quite important. This culture experimentation space, and also just allowing the space for a lot of people and people with competencies to contribute. They might not have a name of, we've always had this problem with our work. If we do a call to action for urban innovators, it doesn't ring a bell to most people. But they are actually the person who, it can be a gardener, it can be a architect who would like to dabble a bit into volunteer or into community building. It could be an activist who experienced exhaustion from all the work and trying to capture new ways of doing things. We have Slido full of questions, very pinpointed. I think maybe it'd be useful to go into the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle about budget, and also maybe about the scale of our work, because I think it would be quite helpful to understand a bit what are our budgets for experimentation on projects, on themes, on how we choose thematic areas. Also on how we pivot our role and if it changes. So I think all of our organizations here have done this already quite significantly, about core themes and so on. So maybe let's start with the budget question, so we can give a sense of scale, and also about how we choose projects. Mm-hmm.
I can start the budget question. So the budgeting for us has always been strange, because we started out with no budget. Our jobs are already paid for. You know, when we started New Urban Mechanics, it was entirely fictitious in the sense that, you know, one day we just invented it, and it let it be, right? It was by fiat. And so I was physically sitting on a different floor in City Hall, and Chris Osgood was sitting on a different floor, and I just went downstairs and started sitting next to him, and that was how we traded it. That was it. And so I was already being paid in those days actually I'm still technically paid by the IT department. And Chris in those days was in the mayor's office more formally. And so it took about 4 years almost before us to get any kind of a real budget. What we did get sooner than a city budget was philanthropic support. And so we connected pretty quickly with some of the national philanthropies here in the US. We connected very quickly with the MacArthur Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and the Bloomberg Foundation, and we got unrestricted grants very quickly. So they just sign a check and say, here you go. And so some of that money actually still exists. We've been very parsimonious with it, but you know, since then we've managed to be able to get city operating dollars for full-time staff and so on. But it's not that big. You know, it's only you know, it's just sort of in the low tens of thousands of dollars, right? So I think it's not enough to pay for the kinds of things that we want to, or that we would do if we were only tapping that as a resource. Actually, at the end of each year, we generally have budget left over. We don't usually spend all of it, but we get a lot done via in-kind contributions from universities and by tapping partners inside and outside of government. And as we've both said that, you know, we're able to find ways to tap the budgets of other departments. So if we're working with the Energy and Environment Department to take on an issue, they probably already have budget to do that. And so that our contribution is to help them spend that more effectively, let's say. And so as we're choosing projects, I mean, this is a thorny one for us, is big, but in general, just sort of in the same way that I was talking before about balancing the needs of the community with the needs of the mayor, it's a similar kind of tension. in terms of selecting projects, right? Because selecting projects is really just is how we get things done, obviously. And so, we're always trying to figure out, well, if we do this, does that, and we always have like several goals. We have this idea of a shadow agenda in new urban mechanics, which is about the work that we think is important to get to happen, to change the way that government works. It was about being delightful and being good humans and all these different things. And so we have those dimensions as we think about the kind of projects that we take on. Does it allow us to build trust with, which is vital to us, because we can't get anything done if people don't trust that we'll do what we say we're going to do. So does a particular project allow us to build a trustful relationship with the new department, right? That's one consideration. Does it deliver on something the mayor needs, either near term or long term? That's another consideration. Does it actually make life better in our city? How do we have a good university partner to assess and evaluate the effectiveness of what we're trying to do? So all of these things are in our heads as we think about things, and to greater or lesser extent depending on the project.
Just to add to that, I think so when we are thinking about our project budget, so not our salaries, most of which are paid for by the city, but as Nigel said, across different departments, so they don't all sit in the mayor's office budget. One of the things that we have to be practical and pragmatic about, and this I think really comes from Nigel and his co-founder Chris Osgood's days, is just the reality of the constraints that we're working within. So we have procurement guidelines that we have to, stay in line with, and in Massachusetts, at least for our context, there's a threshold under which you can issue a contract and do the work based on sound business practices. And it gets really technical and really in the weeds quickly. But when we think about, a multi-million-dollar project, which probably would take 3 years or more, New Urban Mechanics doesn't operate at that scale at the current moment, because what we're trying to do is learn quickly. And so we want to learn $5,000 at a time, right? And so we can go and do an ethnography with someone who's trained as a magician, but actually is able to sort of translate that into a really interesting ethnography of a space for individuals who are experiencing substance use disorders that gives us a totally different perspective, qualitative research, a real different understanding of how our neighbors are experiencing that space and experiencing the services we're providing for a small budget, a short amount of time, that then leads us to 2 years from then being able to put out that $2-3 million, whatever it is, tender for the actual construction of the permanent space. And so I think when we think about our, roughly $40,000 budget, we're thinking in increments of $5,000 and $10,000 projects that help us learn something that inform the broader strategy. So we're not solving, a failing bridge, a deconstructed bridge within New Urban Mechanics, but we could work with Public Works to think about, okay, like what is the value of that bridge, or why are people so attached to that bridge, or whatever it is. And I think we grapple with, and we don't have a good answer to this yet, but we grapple with, yes, we want to tap into the goodwill and the creative energy of the community, but we also want to compensate people for their time. But we also don't want compensation to only be financial, right? We exist within this very neoliberal capitalist framework, which means that, time is money, and people, the way that people express value and worth is through dollars or currency. But we know that there are other ways to compensate people for their work, for their labor. And so we're actively grappling with that when we think about, how do we want to compensate our partners, and what sort of nebulousness do you walk into when you start compensating for civic engagement? What does that mean in the future? Are we paying people to vote? Right, you can take it to a ridiculous conclusion, but I think it's an active conversation that we're having, to Nigel's point, about really trying to push ourselves as a team about what's in, what feels weird, those types of things.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You actually answered in abundance. I'll try a quick recap. So in terms of budget, I think it's a combination. So the let's say the core staff costs is municipal budget, being employees of the municipality, but afterwards for projects, it's a combination of grants, municipal budget in a small way, and also finding the right partnerships that can contribute for making that work happen. in terms of choosing core topics, it's as Nigel explained, it's very much focusing on principles. So it can sometimes go into the one principle is it actually improving the quality of life of residents in Boston? The second one, is it aligned with the strategic lines of the city? And third, does it build relations? Does it actually solve some things that cannot be solved in the classical way on how actually municipal departments work right now? So finding these gray areas or these unspotted areas that, unless they would have an approach, a very tailor-made approach, they would probably not see the light of day. So just as a quick recap, until we move to Sylvine, also in terms of budget and core topics. And maybe, Sylvine, I was thinking that maybe you could comment on, I know that you also worked with big grants for some of your programs, and maybe also about the space that you used to have, the Super Public, if it's something worthwhile in terms of core topics. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I can. So in terms of budget, I think it's so I don't work for Paris Lab. Although we are based in Paris, but in La Transfo we've worked with about 8 to 10 cities. So I will talk more about their labs. I think they are very diverse. But I can say that most of them have a dedicated team, and it's something that is very important. But some have only a resource for a team, and like what you've described, Nigel, they rely more on the department they work with to finance investment on projects, and some have also a budget for external expertise, such as designers, sociologists, etc. So I think it goes from 0 to maybe I think 70,000 euros per year. So it's not that much. Nevertheless, maybe usually the teams are formed between people that were already in the organization. So someone who is able to build the lab, also in terms of connections, in terms of partnerships. So someone who knows very well the administration and who is nice and can make friends and partners. But very often there's also the recruitment of a designer or sociologist, and I think it goes very well with the program of La Transfo, with the idea of diversifying the profiles that are inside the public administrations. In France, it's many lawyers, many legal specialists, many urban planners, etc. So it's also how do you change this. And another specificity is that once again, following La Transfo model, in most of the labs, there are also temporary contributors, meaning public agents that can dedicate, in some cases, it's 1 day per week. In some cases, it's 1 week per year. So it's very different. But that also allows that the lab to extend its team, but also to connect more beyond the smaller lab coordinator and 1 or 2 person around. And to finish around the topic of resources, we also, in 2 territories, in 2 regions, we work on mutualized labs, meaning that labs that are jointly organized between 1 city, 1 county, and 1 region, for instance. So labs that work on similar topics, that maybe in the end will mutualize some resource, etc., or will work on distributed projects. So it's also more how do you build and share resources on the territory, and I think it's quite interesting. In terms of core topics, I think we share criteria with Boston. Yeah, we have pretty much the same. Maybe I would add also the fact that we choose a project, or if it's not already defined, we like to be a little bit once things are not chosen, when it's not too much in a point of urgency, when it's not too high on the political agenda. This is signals that we think that we won't have enough margin to work. So I think that's also an important point. And another one that often happens in some labs is we recommend also them to not to end up as being the nice person who will animate meetings with facilitating skills, etc. It's useful to do it sometimes to start with a project, but if as a lab you end up by doing only this and you are known for this, it means that probably you will never have the means to become really strategic, and that once they need to cut something, it's not a good sign. So I think it's also important to take into account. And in terms of space, so that's more a question for the 27th region, I think, Anna. So it's true that we, so as a non-profit, we are embedded in a community that used to be a place for a community, that used to gather designers, sociologists in a space, and it was very useful for cooperation, informal projects, etc. And then we have moved to a bigger space that is owned by the city of Paris, with organizations working on digital transformation, with group of activists also. So we try to blend and extend our community. The truth is that now we are kind of with no space, because we are in between. So we are transitioning to a new space with more organization working more on the topic of transition, circular economy, etc. So it's also a context bringing new topics around us. So I don't know if that answers your question, Anna.
Sort of. I'll have a follow-up very soon. But until then, Sylvina, I also have a follow-up, because we have a couple of questions, because a lot of our audience, we actually had local elections in Romania in September. So what we see in most of the major cities is a change of leadership, and also quite a big curiosity on how to explore alternative models that could actually promote a culture of collaboration and partnerships. So a couple of the questions on Slido are a bit how would you pitch urban innovation unit to a city, and so on and so forth. I will pivot a bit this question in the sense on, because your latest programs was actually to offer support to various entities that were developing labs. So can you maybe tell us how you selected them, or what was the process behind this? What kind of support were you offering?
Okay. I think that like most of the cities came to us from previous discussions, etc., but not only. Probably one key starting point is either internal and managerial, and in many of them it was really from the standpoint of observing a fatigue in the administration, and a sense of not achieving or not delivering in some policy area. For example, with raising figures of non-use of certain public policies, especially social public policies, where there's a budget, but the budget is not totally used. And so you can interpret it as a failure in public policies. But also for the public servants, public agents, you can also see that it creates frustration. it creates inertia, but also it creates health problem in the end. And so I think there's usually there's really these two approach that are really key in trying to launch new dynamic in the a new innovation dynamic in local government. I think in the end, what is important is also to be cautious that this big message that can be sent by an elected representative or by a top manager, chief of staff, very enthusiastic, is not followed by a big gap, like especially at the middle management, that you have a big message, but in the end you have a lot of hierarchy, new ideas, especially when it comes from people that are in the third categories are not welcomed, etc. So I think one thing we try to be cautious about is that this big gap, and that everyone is at least conscious of the danger of such a gap between a big message and the reality on the ground. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the core things that you're describing is that it has to be initiative and motivation from that certain agency of why they would like this change. And what we're talking a bit in code right now in terms of labs is whatever process that could bring change and a different mindset, a sort of vital energy. And of course, afterwards, probably it can take different shapes and sizes. You can really think about the governance structure, if this is going to be a long-term lab and so on. From what I know, and I've seen a lot of labs are actually, they are for 4 or 5 years, and then they either disappear, transform. So I think also this tone of voice on how you set it up, on for what you set it up, and what it really means to be agile is quite important in the conversation. I know that since March, our lives have changed significantly, and we have a question on how our work has pivoted. It was, were there moments when your department or organization had to pivot from the initial mandate you received and way of working? If so, why? Of course, we can talk about anything, but I was thinking that maybe this could be also a reflection on if our work changed during the pandemic, and if so, why. I will also share a bit about what happened to us since March, because it was a very different mindset, but I'm curious to hear first from you.
Well, our work certainly changed in March, not only because of COVID, but certainly in part. The way, so as the city responded to the pandemic, the first thing that happened was how we work, right? So people had to get out of City Hall, right? So City Hall is right in the heart of downtown in Boston. And for years, people had been asking for the privilege to work at home, right? And there was always reasons why it was not possible. And then we just did it. Then everyone just did it, and it worked pretty well, which was good to see. There was obviously hiccups, and there's a small number of people still at City Hall doing sort of certain vital services. So in that sense, that was for some, as I'm sort of talking to, I think different groups across the city have experienced that in different ways. I think for some people, it was sort of a minor thing. I go to this place and not that place. I think for us, it's been, just shy of catastrophic. Like it's been a big deal for us. We've always been, we have tried to, I'm going to be mushy here. We try to hire people that we can love, right? And so just like your family, if you can't be with these people that you love at work, that's hard to do, And so I think we've been suffering in different ways. And for some people, we're able to sublimate it more than others, but for others, I think it's very clearly an ongoing issue, and we try to respect that as much as we can. So in that way, it's been very hard for new urban mechanics. I think there's probably other departments that would right? It's been no problem for them. Maybe for organizations that are more transactional, hard to say. The other thing that's been a big difference for us, though, is sort of in the months following March, with the lynching of George Floyd and all the subsequent sort of racial murders that have happened across the U.S. And I think, again, this was another major singularity for us. It just stopped us cold. And certainly this is not a new thing. And it's not something that it's not as though we've never talked about race in America, right? You can't not talk about race in America and be an honest public servant, I think. But it was so immediate that, it once again became a moment of inflection. How we can't do what we did yesterday in this environment, right, where government is murdering its citizens, right, is in a racialized way, and so that requires a response from us. And so the mayor, to his credit, he also, I think, took it really hard, and I think the entire city did, and he declared racism as a public health emergency in our city, which has given us a programmatic way to think about how do we allocate resources towards this issue. But it's been great that he's done that. But I think that we are trying to think about, what does urban innovation look like in a anti-racist world, right? So all of us seem to have read Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, around the same time, or a lot of us. And so we were all thinking in one way or another, how should this affect the work? Is it just about how we make the decisions, or is there a way of reinventing your mechanics and to be an anti-racist organization? And so, it's as we try to grapple with that, I think it's an ongoing battle, and one of the first things that came up for us was that, how are we going to think about race? Because obviously American is a deeply racist country in so many ways, certainly anti-Black racism and anti-brown racism, but anti-Native racism is a huge issue in our country. And we can't help the fact that we do the work that we do in the unsettled, land of the Massachusetts people, who are not even recognized by the state, even though we're named after them. And how should that show up in our work? So we've been trying to think through, traditionally, when you think about Indigenous justice, the cities have not had much of a part in recognizing tribal sovereignty. And so, but, it's been the state and the federal government. But now we're trying to look at that and say, maybe there is a way that we as a municipality can make a statement about how we're going to think and work and what we're going to value in relation to the Indigenous people whose land that we're sitting on, right? And we're doing the things that we're doing. So it's been a tumultuous, what has it been, 8 months, 6 months? I don't even know. Months since that time. And we're still going through it. So it's been a tough.
And I think this speaks a bit about quite a practical example on how you choose core topics to work on, because what you're describing is actually in a whirlwind when suddenly you see these huge societal changes, that you start saying, okay, maybe this is actually the cherry on the top, when we actually have to truthfully reflect on our work, whether that work was biased from the first from the beginning. And I know that you have begun such a, I don't know how to name it, apart from a big a huge project. Yeah,
we're on a journey is how we're describing it. I think what Nigel shared cannot be understated, the importance and the emotional sort of tenor of the last 8-9 months. If it's useful, I think some banal examples of how our work has changed, or what our work has meant or looked like in the pandemic. I think because we all carry, the 9 of us carry so many cross-cutting relationships, and we see different perspectives into that hierarchy. So we have relationships with the cabinet level in Boston, they're called chiefs, down to the line level, the folks who are at the counter where you pay your parking ticket, right? So we see across the vertical structure as well as across the horizontal structure. So we were very quickly able to be kind of like a Wikipedia of city government as we were trying to figure out, does someone have a refrigerated truck that we could bring meals to young people who are no longer getting those meals from their schools? Or, I think that this department actually has 7 iPads, and so we could give them to that other department because they need them to register people for some sort of public health reason. And that it's similar to when we take a meeting, like we'll take any meeting with anyone, right? At least the first one. And I think that comes from an assumption that you can't know in advance if something is going to be useful. So we meet with startups from everywhere. We, took a meeting with Amma from Cluj because why not, right? 5 years ago. I think the same thing is true for a lot of the strange, like archaic knowledge that we as a team hold. You don't know when it's going to be relevant for us to know that, a department has access to this particular software, or you don't know when it's going to be relevant that your relationship with someone in the Commission for Older Adults, you're going to be able to help them create walking routes, safe walking routes for older adults during the winter because you can walk them through, an online mapping exercise. So I think, in short, what I'm trying to say is our team's positionality and our relationships and our knowledge of the sort of like most basic version of a platform, right? In a very tangible example, the city has a GIS platform that is proprietary and you have to be an expert on it to use it. But if we can help a department map something very simply on OpenStreetMap or Google Maps, great. And we can fill that capacity gap because the IT department is literally trying to send 15,000 employees home, right? They don't have time to use satellite imagery to count how many parking spaces there are so that we can give them to healthcare professionals who are no longer taking public transit. So I think very tactically, we immediately paused all of our projects and just started filling in gaps that were needed by other departments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks a lot for that live feed on how these last months were. Mm-hmm. Sylvine, what about you? Did you feel that you had to pivot your work or so change significantly, or how was it?
I think in April we've launched a work with a network of labs and friends to try to understand what innovations have been accelerated with the crisis, and so we've launched an investigation with I think a group of 25 to 30 of public agents. And we've made about, I think, 100 interviews of people across France. So that was a big work. And maybe just to react to what Nigel and Jacqueline shared, I think one thing that we've seen is that it shows that public transformation needs to be more political, I think. There could be a tendency to be to focus on methodology, to focus on path, on ways of working. I think it's important, but I think what it has shown is also the end, the objective, and I think the urgency only made this stronger. And for example, in some local governments, the labs were put a little bit aside, and it was more the resilience team that was working very much. But and so the lab was coming in support with methodology. So that it's a bit theoretical, but I think it shows the importance of connecting this topic of resilience, this topic of transformation, and this topic of public transformation, and really to be more political. That's one thing. And maybe another thing that we've seen is that in many local governments, a lot of public agents acted, went to help non-profits, when to help people to work as intermediary, etc. And so I think it's also put some light on the importance of the status of public agent, I think. And but it also puts the light of the dedication, I think, and the importance of this civic dedication. And what we reflect on was how to transform public administration so it doesn't only rely on this public servant that is going to go help, despite his manager, for example. So how do we build also frames in the administration also to allow more sharing, more public civic partnerships, more public commons partnerships? For example, what we have been reflecting on is ways to share public agents between local government and non-profits, or way to design public buildings with more flexible use, because we've seen that during the pandemic, there was maybe some schools or maybe some city halls that were used to distribute food, but also as dormitories for people in the street. So I think it also invites us to think as like, how do we think public resources more openly and in a more common way? So in a more shared way, actually. And I think it's the same with human resources. And maybe one last thing, but it's maybe more of a common sense. It's that we've also seen that you don't improvise if you're not a good musician, if you have not worked a lot. And I think we've seen that the local government that responded in the most effective way were the one where there was already a culture of experimentation, a culture of collaboration, the governance where there was already civic organization working aside to the local governance. So I think it all also puts the light on the fact that we need to work on this muscle of improvisation, because I think public crises are not. It's not. It will become also a new normal in some ways, and I think it's totally what Nigel was also showing. There was a pandemic. There was after another crisis, and here in France it's not the same size, but I think it's a bit the same.
And I think it comes down to who holds this space for reflection or taking these learnings, because you can always see these patterns of behavior of people acting out of goodwill, going the extra mile. But unless that behavior is either recognized and also made easy, it's very hard to just suppose that it's just going to carry on like that. So in a way, you need to cultivate serendipity. For us, it was, during this time, it became quite clear a bit the limits of the program that we have created in Cluj, because as you know, we started in 2017, a bit in the spirit that Nigel described. We don't know exactly how this should be shaped. We have too many questions, but let's just start. And I actually have to thank my co-designer Stefan for this approach of just jumping into this, and to my other co-designer Ovidiu for allowing this open card of trust from the municipality to, hey, let's do this together. So actually, the Urban Innovation Unit was called the Cluj Innovation Fund for the first year, just doing small micro interventions and supporting initiative groups. And I think what we established a bit just a vague framework, in the sense that for 2 or 3 years we're going to see how a program methodology could look like for the city of Cluj, but not putting any kind of pressure of saying this is how Urban Innovation Unit should look like. Of course, in Cluj we also like to be number one, so of course we we like these things of being the first urban innovation unit in Eastern Europe and so on and so forth. But we really understood the context that we were operating in, which was a sense making on what is possible and why is it useful, because we are aware of the challenges of Romanian cities, which are huge and have to do from very bad public service to lack of evaluation of public policies. So what Sylvine was describing, the fact that you actually see that the policy is not rendering results, for us that information is very hard to find. So even just mapping, okay, what's actually the problem, what's actually the issue, is a project in itself, and of separating causes from effects. So because we structured our work into pilot projects on thematic areas and also had this mindset that next year we're going to transfer our approach to the two main founding organizations, Cluj Cultural Center and Cluj-Napoca Municipality, we didn't actually have a lot of instruments at hand on how to operate very fast when change is happening. But we discovered we had a very good capacity of observing that change is happening and a good capacity of translating that. So I think it was quite a big blow that we didn't have a lot of action capacity, but we had a lot of reflection capacity, which right now, and we use that a lot. We created the Cluj Resilience Tracker to map how local stakeholders responded, and they did amazing things. And then we tried to understand what other mapping exercises and sense making were going on in the country. So we connected all these initiatives, and there were quite insightful conclusions about how everybody was learning by doing. And right now we're developing a support mechanism for transferring these lessons learned from, of everybody into short fellowships of action. So I think for me and for us, it was quite a blow in the sense that, okay, we're not necessarily the action lab that maybe we thought we might be in 2017, but we are in a unique position to reflect and to translate from various languages. And I think that's also quite powerful in this point, where it seems that we have a lot of differences among ourselves. And I think the connectors who are able to go behind the political divides, the racial divides, and figure out what actually connects them is quite strong. Yeah. So right now it's complete darkness in Romania, and probably a lot of sunshine in Boston, our Boston area. So I was thinking that we might take one final question from Slido, and then maybe one final question among ourselves, if you want to raise something. Let's see. I don't know if you looked a bit at the at Slido, if you have a favorite one. I like this one a lot. Maybe who has felt threatened by your work? For instance, a department or role that might have been rendered obsolete or irrelevant by your work. Because we operate a lot of change, and change means loss. And I think there's a lot of vitality about change making, and it's a lab, and you can experiment, and you can bring change, and that's a good thing. But I think we don't talk a lot, or we're not so prepared about the fact that change really comes with loss. And that is also being able to manage that in the relationships and partnerships that we do. The fact that we might be very energetic when we start and saying that we're going to change the way, I don't know, a certain project on urban mobility is implemented. But when you actually understand that you have to make a lot of changes that give you an extra amount of work, but also might also change significantly your role as a coordinator, maybe, or stuff like that. It comes a bit with pain. So who felt threatened about your work in the present, in the past? What happened?
Maybe on our side, it's sometimes like in La Transfo again, if I take this example, it's sometimes difficult to work with departments of human resources and of citizen participation, and I think it's really it's a recurring issue. I think it's a really a matter of finding areas of conflict and of potential rivalry, I think. And but I think it's also a matter of how do you share and open the box on the way you work and on your methodology because usually the starting point of the conflict is, oh, but we already do all this. So we already train public agents to be more innovative, and we already involve citizens in our work. It's our job, and but I think what is interesting is really when you go in the core of how do you think differently, how this can be. So really, how do you build a conversation between this departments, and that's usually difficult. And at the opposite, it's many times it's easy to work with technicians. It's easy to work with, for example, housing department because they know more directly what you can bring in their work because they feel far away from the user, so you will help them. So it's I think it's two different postures.
Oh yeah, Nigel. I'm gonna chime in for 1 second, and then I'll hand you the mic. I think for me, it's less a specific department or group of people, and I think it's more about being on a spectrum of sort of adherence to dogma or like valuing the rigid orthodoxy. I think we rub those people the wrong way. I think if your mindset and sort of way of moving through the world of the public sector is, this is the process. I cannot, vary from the process, even if there's some contextual situation that might make me want to vary from the process. I can't or won't. And so my answer is no. And so then when that constituent or that group somehow finds their way to new urban mechanics and we say, yeah, sure, it might be possible. Like, we don't know, but we'll look into it. I think that's when we start to ruffle feathers a little bit, because we somehow become a way of going around the process and around whatever the dogmatic sort of value is. And I think one of our sort of reasons for being is to show that alternative possibilities are in fact possible. Whether that's, drawing from sci-fi or, queer futurism, like whatever it is, being an instantiation of saying like, it's possible to act in a different way. And so our whole existence is anathema to this commitment to rigid structure dogma. And so I think, there are some examples of that, but I think it doesn't sit necessarily within a department, because a department or an agency or a team is not a monolith, of course. It's comprised of many humans who feel differently about different things. But if you look across the 11 years or so of new urban mechanics, kind of walking through the halls of city government, I think those are the folks that would not say that, I forget how the question was phrased, whose work or who do we annoy or something. But, I think it becomes a conversation piece. I don't know, Nigel, what your answer would be.
Yeah, that's a very good reframing.
I think there are a few places. I think that when we started doing this work in neuromechanics, I think we were often associated with technology. We try not to do that, because we do a lot more than technology, but we have often been seen as the technology innovators, which has caused us to butt heads with the IT department like constantly over the last 5 to 6 years. And so they often get frustrated with us, but when other people call us to help them do technology-y kinds of things, we always start with a yes. You know, we don't, you know, sometimes to our detriment, you know, but we always try to get to a yes first. And then we try to figure out how do we, you know, come up with a timeline that makes sense, because we want to create space for people to be more expansive in their thinking. So if that means that we have to take on some extra work, I think we try to do that. And so that causes us to butt heads frequently or to ruffle feathers. I think the other thing is that one of the things that we've done over the past few years, and you know, I think one of our colleagues, we have a director of civic design who I think you've met, Sabrina. Sabrina has very specific, she's a trained designer and anthropologist, more or less. And so inspired by Sabrina and sort of using design language, design-esque language of being, you know, people-centered and that sort of thing, I think it has changed people's expectations. And so I think people get really excited when we start introducing these aspects to projects. But the challenge is, it also means, and it doesn't always seem obvious that when you at the outset, but that if you're going to do these things, it means that you're going to have to change what you do somewhere down the line, right? You're going to have to change the way that you talk to the community, probably, to adhere to the principles that, right? Because on the front end, it helps you feel creative and more broad-minded and imaginative about what you're doing. But it also means that if you're just doing that to feel good, right, then that's a failure. So then the work that has to go in downstream about how do you actually then incorporate that into the design of whatever the building it is, I think that often puts people off. And it's not quite ruffling feathers, but it is sort of changing expectations and putting people into more uncertain territory.
Yeah, speaking of territories, what we found was that because this thing of whatever we were doing had to be described as in comparison or as a proxy to something. So you are a bit like the new urban mechanics were in the beginning. You are the startup of the municipality, or for us, so you are like a research department. And of course, you are pissing off the research people because you're not doing pure research. And so you are like the tech innovators. But of course, you're pissing off the IT companies who are doing real innovation in terms of a prototype of new products and so on. So I think this journey of making our work a standalone work, not necessarily described by other elements, comes with such pains. But creating an open space of explaining and finding a common ground is essential. Yeah, I would. I'm curious a bit if we have questions among ourselves, because if not, I know that a couple of people in different Romanian cities are thinking about starting these things, or just finding out more. So I'm curious, what pieces of advice would you give them, like short snippets of what they should consider when they start such an endeavor?
I will offer one. I think we've talked around this and we've said it, but maybe to the best extent that you can, don't presuppose the answer. You know, we started a housing innovation lab 5 years into New Urban Mechanics. But if we had started with just the housing innovation lab, we would have missed so many opportunities for serendipity and seeing the connection between, you know, housing and so-called third spaces, or housing and, you know, climate change, energy retrofits. So my sense is there will be pressure to say, oh, we are starting an innovation team and we are going to focus on transportation and circular economy. But to the extent that you can not put that constraint on and let the exploration unfold organically and let there be random side projects that don't actually end up going anywhere or turning into a big portfolio, I think that's extremely useful, because you can't know in advance what is going to be, like, to Sylvine's point, like which public agents are going to have both the capacity and the interest to do that, or how their relationship with some other department is useful for a broad portfolio of projects. So to the extent that you can keep it sort of loose and free range, I think that would be a piece of advice. You're on mute, Sylvain.
The famous phrases of 2020. You're on mute. Do I hear myself?
No, just to build on this, I think it's also starting from within, with the capacity of the organization, with the inside knowledge of the organization. I think hiring some external consultant, if it doesn't involve also the internal forces and the internal intelligence, will only have a very short impact. So I think really starting with the intelligence of the organization is important.
The last thing I will say, that I think my colleagues have said pretty much anything that I would say, but I think it's in some ways people continue to make this mistake, to not equate innovation with technology. Like, I can't say that loud enough. Technology and innovation are not equivalent. There's a broader world out there that technology doesn't. It could be, but I've never seen, like, right, there's like housing and climate change and all the things the changes that we need to see in the world. Maybe there's a technology spin on it, but if it's just about apps and gadgets and sensors, I think we're missing the boat. So be more broad-minded as you think about what innovation, or at least where innovation starts.
Just to pick up on that, Nigel, because I think that's a really important point, and something that we've been trying to expand the language around, that is that technology is not just digital technologies, right? A bench is a technology. A piece of metal, a 400-pound piece of metal on the side of a truck to prevent pedestrians and cyclists from getting swept under the back wheels when a truck is making a turn, is a piece of technology. A campfire is a technology of gathering, to, from the words of a good collaborator of ours, Catherine D'Ignazio. There are so many things that count as technologies, but when we just get into this, to Nigel's point, sort of borrowed from the business sector, or borrowed from, in our case, Silicon Valley, the West Coast, it's an app. This is the Facebook of this, to Amma's point about metaphor, and so many other things are technologies. And so I think we need to take that word back and make it make sense in our contexts, but always asking, like, what is the civic purpose of this, or what is the value of this that is rooted in some sort of justice or orientation toward people's humanity.
Yeah, and I think that brings a lot of soul in our conversation about innovation labs, because as our talk was dedicated, okay, how do you deliver municipal innovation inside, outside government? The answer is yes, you can. Yes, it can take a lot of shapes depending on what are your principles of action, and most importantly is this one, to not get the demo version of, you use technology, you start testing products or things like that. It's actually about long-term change on how we as a society can work collectively together, and seeing a bit what is happening around us. We need a lot of practice, trust, and patience and optimism that can develop throughout time. This talk, we decided to do just this short bit dedicated to this subject, because we know there's a lot of interest. In 2021, we're going to, as it is a year of dissemination about our work at the Urban Innovation Unit in Cluj-Napoca, we're going to go bit by bit through the lessons learned that we learned from 2017 until now, on pilot projects, failures, pivoting, a lot of pivoting, and what is next. And we're also launching an open call in January for personalized free one-to-one consultations. They're generally geared for Romanian cities, but if somebody else is interested, we're happy to conduct them in English. Just so we can tackle more in depth some of the questions of hows, what, why, what are some other resources that are out there. And you can find more information on the website, which is divizia de inovare.ro. Yeah, with this promo moment, I would, if you want to maybe say a final thing until I say the final thank yous. Generally, I would look you in the eye and guess this, but this is a bit harder.
I mean, we've covered a lot of territory, so I think, though, again, speaking from where I work and where I live, I think our communities are asking us to do things in new ways, and I think innovation, or whatever the right word is, or the right set of values and concepts, is needed now more than ever, right? Because our country is more divided than it's ever been. We're in a dangerous place socially and economically and environmentally and so on. So I think that people are demanding, whether they realize it or not, for us to do creative work and to do our best work, so that we have to, I think there's this moment, to reimagine, reconceive through the lens of creativity, what government is and what it does and how it does it and who benefits. And so I think that if, I've said for the 10 years that I've been doing this work that, every year, if I get a lot of, these graduate students that want to say, oh, what do I do with my life? And what do we do? And I always say that now is the perfect time to do this work, but now really is the perfect time to get involved. 2020, we're on the precipice of, tremendous change next year, here and everywhere. And so for those of you that are considering doing it, I think we need creative minds, new values, full humans to do the work now more than ever.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe to complete, I can also share our work is evaluating as a 27th region. We are more and more interested in the topic of public civic or public commons partnership, meaning how we can invent new forms of governance, new way of sharing power between cities and public administration and citizens. And I think that's also things that we have seen a lot during the crisis, and I think it's also an aspiration of citizens also to tackle big problems on the side of public administrations, and that public administration are not the only garant of general interest, but that they can share this with. So I think it's also a new way of looking at public transformation. And another thing maybe is that I think the crisis has also shown how public action is important, also how precious it is for those who were doubting. But I think in our country, a big part of the political class has also the objective of reducing the public sphere. So I think it's also it also put also more importance on our work also because I think we are more to think that we are important. I don't know if that was clear.
Indeed, the time is now, and also the sense of why making change in the public sector, be it, let's say, inside or outside, but actually supporting public actions that can benefit us as a society, not just silos. Thank you a lot for the talk, for taking the time to reflect on this, and also to share some of the roller coaster that is still going on. I do hope that we're going to have a offline 2021 meeting to see what the next year has brought. And a special thank you to my colleague Alexandra Angel, who was the Slido master and did a lot of the preparation behind. And I really I really look forward to a setup where you can see all of our team and colleagues. To our special tech guy, so thank you. It's the first time that we use this platform and we like it. Next year, we're going to do a couple of events and you're going to see the trio of the co-designers behind the Urban Innovation Unit. So Ovidiu, Stefan, and myself. We have very different perspective on things, and I think this is what brought a lot of delight and why we managed to do this quite wild program in a context where it wasn't necessarily an enabling context when we started it, but now I'm happy to see that there's a lot of interest from a lot of cities, and yeah, I look forward to seeing this change happening all around the country. A special thank you also to the municipality of Cluj-Napoca for supporting us, also doing this event and our work. And to the viewers, if for the ones, I know that it was quite awkward time, but we tried to connect the two time zones, and we are happy that we did that. So thank you very much. Digital wave of goodbye, and yeah, see you soon in 2021.
Thank you very much.